In this video, we'll be looking at the key components of the Unity editor. After loading Unity up and importing the workshop assets, you should have a window that looks something like this. This is the default layout for Unity. Notice we have a hierarchy, we have a scene and a game window, an inspector, and down the bottom we have the project and console. We can move these windows anywhere we wish, just by dragging the tab around. So for example, the console we can drag up here, the game window we can make half size. And again, all the windows up here, we can drag and move them to whatever size we wish. Up here, there are some default settings. We'll have a look in here. We can see there is different ways that Unity has predefined some layouts for us. We can go ahead and save our layout, and we can delete layouts as well. I'm going to return mine back to default for now. Once back in the default layout, I want to look at the scene window. The scene is where we add game objects into, so we can create interactions. We do this through the hierarchy. We go over to the hierarchy, drop down the hierarchy, and we can see that there is a main camera and a directional light added in by default. We can add other components in a number of ways. We can use the plus symbol next to the hierarchy and add one of the features. We can right click inside the hierarchy to add the same features, or we can come up to the top window where it says game object and we can add them from here. It doesn't matter which way you choose, they're all the same. Let's add a game object to our scene. I'm going to use the right click method. I'm going to right click, I'm going to come down to 3D object and across to cube. What happens now is we're selected on the cube in the hierarchy and we can see that it's been displayed here in the scene. Notice now that the inspector is displaying the elements related to this game object. So if, for example, I click on the directional light, we can see how the components in the inspect update, and similarly with the main camera. We click back on the cube, we can see these are the components that are related to the cube. So for example, there's a transform component, which basically is the position and the rotation of the game object. There are some other things for how it's displayed. We'll go into more detail about these components later in the course. If we take a look at the transform component, we can see that there's a position, rotation, and scale. And the X coordinate for position is related to this red color. So for example, I can move, or I can type in the value here. If I move it by 1, and see how the position of the object moves along that axis. Now this 1 relates to 1 meter, or 1 Unity unit, which is meters. We can drag from here as well, where we get the arrows, and we can see how it moves across and it repositions itself along that particular axis. We can also do this within the scene window, just by dragging along. If we want to move along the different axes, we can just use the single arrow. If we want to move along a number of axes at once, we can choose to move along, say, the X and the Z axis. We can sort of hover in on this section here, and it will move across on those, and it will not change the Y axis. Should we wish to reset our values back, we can use the little 3 dot within the transform component and go to reset. That'll position it back to 0, 0, 0. In order to navigate within Unity, what we could use is the mouse and the keyboard. So, for example, if we zoom in using the scroll wheel on our mouse, and it's very difficult if you're not using a mouse, so make sure you have a mouse for this course. So zoom in, and you can see how we zoom into the object. If we use our left mouse button, that simply selects the game objects in the scene. So in this case, we're selecting all 3 of the game objects, as displayed in the hierarchy. If we use our right mouse button, we can sort of move around our view a little bit. Now, these views don't really do much right now, but I suppose if we were zooming in onto objects and using a combination of these different mouse buttons, we'll be able to navigate our way around the scene. If we start to employ now the Alt key, we can start to manipulate and move around certain places in our scene. So hold down the Alt key. With your left mouse button, we can sort of move and navigate around a position. Now, we selected that position just by zooming in on it. And you can see how we can sort of move around a specific location in the scene. If we do the same by holding down the Alt key now, and we use our right mouse button, we can sort of zoom in and out. And the scroll wheel still works in the same way. Now, if we want to move and have a look at this object that's in our scene, which is the cube, what we can do is click on the cube. That now becomes our object of selection. We have a look at with the Alt key selected, and we start to look around again with our left mouse key. You can see it's still not really orbiting around our object. So in order to do this, what we want to do is press the F key. So F for Foxtrot. That focuses our view on that particular game object. So now when we use the Alt key and the left mouse button, we can navigate around the object. It takes a little bit of practice to get used to the navigation inside of Unity, so make sure you have a look at that. For any other game objects that we add, we simply use the same techniques as we did earlier. So for example, we want to add in another 3D object. So for example, a primitive sphere. We can add that in, and you can see how, because we focused on that object at 0, 0, 0, it's repositioned the second game object at this position too. And in order to move that object, we can just move it across. We can of course be a little bit more accurate by typing in the values in the inspector. Next, because that is our object of focus, we make sure that we press F or we double click in the hierarchy. That will do the same job. So now we navigate and manipulate our way around this game object. If we wanted to join these two together in sort of a group, we can use what's called an empty. So if we right click inside of our hierarchy and go to empty, here we can create an empty game object, which we could then make our objects a child of. So now when we double click or we focus in on the empty, that now becomes our focus, so we can now navigate around it. Finally, the project files that you imported are all displayed down here in the project window. Now, it's very important you keep this organized, because as we add things to this, it can become quite complicated. If you want to create a new folder in your project, you can right click inside of it, come up to create, and create a new folder. You can see in here as well, we can create new scripts, we can create a new scene. You can see there's a number of different assets that we can create for objects in our game. So spend some time exploring the editor and play around with the navigation